رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. ما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Once again, my dear brothers and sisters, and welcome to our Zakat Made Easy presentation. This is something that we normally do, meaning we normally have a Zakat presentation every Ramadan, because this is generally a time when I think many people, if not most people, are calculating their Zakat and taking out their Zakat for the year. So inshallah, what we will aim to do today is go over the essentials of giving zakat. Over the years, we've received many questions. I've looked up many issues myself, although I'm not an expert in the field, but I've sort of have researched or read about the different views the scholars have had on the various issues. So inshallah, today what I will aim to do, because one of the things, one of the feelings I get is that it's something that, if you try to research on your own, it can get quite complicated, right? Because there are different complexities, different views. So inshallah today, what I will aim to do, inshallah, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his guidance, is to try to simplify things, inshallah, and try to present them in a manner that is easily understandable, inshallah, and in a logical sequence, inshallah. If you do have questions, we can make this interactive, inshallah. So I do have the YouTube chat box open, and inshallah I will be periodically checking the Facebook comments as well. So inshallah, if you would like to leave a comment, ask a question, feel free to do so. Although I would kindly request that you try to keep the question till the end, because there's a good chance that your question might be answered and during the course of the presentation, because I have tried to make it as comprehensive as possible, and I hope it is beneficial, inshallah. Now, so before we get right into it, just want to, of course, highlight the importance of zakat. I don't think this really needs to be said or needs to have too much time spent on it, because I am sure that you understand the importance of zakat. MashaAllah, of course, it is one of the pillars, important pillars, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, an obligation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran, along with salah many times, upwards of 30 times mentioned in the Quran. So a very, very important form of ibadah, a worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated different types of worship, worship with our bodies, of course, with our tongues, with our bodies fasting, as an example, with physical effort like Hajj. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated zakat as the form of worship that we do with our money. Of course, there's the voluntary sadaqah as well that we can give, and that is very virtuous. But this mandatory zakat is the equivalent of worship, for example, that we do with our body, with our prayers, and so on and so forth. So this is the equivalent when it comes to worship with our money, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us as a trust. So it's not really ours. The zakat is often seen as the right of the poor and of the deserving. So it's not exactly our money that we are giving. This is the mindset that we should have. Because the reason why I mention this is because, a lot of times we are accustomed to, of course, filling out our tax returns, and we're looking for exemptions. We're looking for ways to lower our taxes. And a lot of times we bring the same mindset to zakat as well. I want to try to change that mindset, inshallah, that we are actually doing an act of worship. We are giving the right of the poor. We are also purifying our wealth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam have told us that zakat is a means of purification of our wealth as well, because as much as we try, there certainly are most likely are instances of haram wealth mixing in with our wealth that we want to be as halal as possible, of course. So this is also a means of purifying our wealth. So great, spiritual virtues, very rewarding as well, inshallah. And at the same time, great wisdom behind zakat, that if everyone, sincerely takes out zakat from their funds, there will be a tremendous amount of charity generated to take care of those in need. So it is a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated benefiting the poor and trying to bring some or take away the disparity that we find, especially when it comes to wealth, and also a means of spiritually purifying ourselves as well, to try to tackle, hit that love of the dunya and of the wealth that often, settles into our hearts, which should not be there. So in any case, multiple benefits and wisdoms behind the mandating of zakat, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, of course. But what we know is that absolutely it is an obligation, and therefore we should be taking it seriously, and we should be taking it as something that we want to do, because it is a form of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah, I will be getting to the questions. I will, as I mentioned, I've tried to make it very comprehensive, inshallah, but easy as well. So inshallah, all your questions will be answered, inshallah, I hope. So please, let's move forward, inshallah, with the presentation, inshallah, and then we can present your questions. Most of the questions, I'm confident, inshallah, will be answered in the course of the presentation. And brother asking, yes, the session is being recorded. So it will be available afterwards on YouTube, inshallah, and on Facebook as well. So let us begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So to start off and sort of reiterate what I mentioned in the beginning, my recommendations here going into this presentation is that, first of all, as I mentioned, calculating zakat has become complex. So at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was relatively simple. It was not as difficult to calculate zakat, because finances weren't as complex. There were some elements of complexity with regards to zakat on livestock, for example, and on crops. But that is probably not very relevant to most of us today, so I'm not going to get into that. But nonetheless, the point is that calculating zakat has become more complex. And if you try to research it on your own, you will find many scholarly views. You will find sometimes conflicting views. So it can be quite challenging to try to figure out what you should do, how you should go about these issues. So my recommendation then is to try to play it safe. And that is what I'm going to recommend to you as well, inshallah. That's what I try to practice myself. Of course, we have that perennial question of fatwa versus taqwa, right? And of course, being in a month when we are fasting, trying to develop our taqwa, and of course, outside of Ramadan as well, we should always try to go as much as possible with the taqwa option, meaning the option that is the safest, as long as we are able to, right? So if you are able to, mashallah, Allah has blessed you, you are wealthy, mashallah, you don't have any concerns about getting groceries, about paying rent, paying mortgage, your home is paid off, you don't really have any financial constraints compared to most other people, then definitely go with the taqwa, okay? Go with the safest option that I'm going to recommend to you, inshallah. That way you will be safe, and you can say in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment that, Ya Allah, I tried to do what was safest and what was best, and I did not try to cut corners when it came to this obligation, right? So try to stick to the taqwa aspect as much as possible, meaning the more safer opinion. Try to follow that whenever possible, inshallah. Try to avoid exemptions. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have this mindset coming from people who, coming from filling out tax forms, that we are trying to look for deductions, we're trying to look for exemptions, we're trying to get away from it as much as possible. That is when we are paying our taxes. But this is different than our taxes. This is not like doing our taxes. This is, again, an obligation, something that we'll be rewarded for, something that will benefit the poor, inshallah, and those who are deserving, and will spiritually purify us in our wealth as well, inshallah. So try to avoid exemptions. Again, if you are able to avoid exemptions altogether and you are able to take the safest route, then go ahead and do that, right? Because the exemptions, honestly, if you do the calculations, for most people, or in many instances, it's not going to be a huge amount. Okay, it's not going to be a huge amount. So if you go ahead and you give the full amount, if you give, what is calculated and what appears to be due without exempting anything, then that is, again, the better thing to do. So try to avoid that unless you need to, unless you have a pressing need, unless there is a reason because of which you need to claim that exemption. Try to avoid exemptions as much as possible. And again, take dispensations only when needed as well. So when there is a way out, try to only do that when you need to. If you don't need to, don't take the dispensation. Go ahead with the higher amount, inshallah. And any reward, any extra that you give, inshallah, let's say it turns out that you ended up giving extra, more than you needed to, then inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you for that. It will count as charity on your behalf, especially if you're giving it in the month of Ramadan. So, if you are able to, then don't worry about it so much. and go ahead and give that extra, inshallah. All right, so number one question that comes up is, when is zakat due? I'm going to go through this quickly, inshallah, because many people may be aware of this already. So the question is, when is it due? So 1 year after reaching nisab. Okay, so once you reach the nisab, then 1 year after that, zakat becomes due upon you. Now, what is the nisab? So nisab is the minimum amount of wealth that a person must possess in order for zakat to become obligatory upon them. And the zakat becomes due 1 year after they reach that point. Okay, now how do you calculate that point? So essentially, now there will be some slight variations with the amounts. Okay, but to be safe, 85 grams of gold. Okay, so when you have 85 grams of gold in your possession, or you have approximately 595 grams of silver, you will also read some places 612, and these were all conversions which were done from the units of measure that the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, that were used at that time. So that's why there are some differences in converting it. But to be safe, 85 grams of gold, if you possess that, or 595 grams of silver, or the equivalent of either one. Okay, so if you go by the gold nisab, then its current value, and the value changes, and this I put in last night, so you can just go and Google, price of a gram of gold, Canadian dollars, and you'll find out what the price is multiplied by 85. So based on current prices, or at least last night's prices, $6,482 approximately Canadian is the gold nisab. So either when you own 85 grams of gold, or its current value, $6,400 approximately, or if you own 595 grams of silver, or its current value, which is approximately $404. Okay, so when one of these things happens, that is when zakat should be on your radar, because 1 year after that point, the date you reach that amount of wealth, when you have that much in your possession, the day you get it, 1 lunar year after that is when zakat will become obligatory upon it. Now, as you can see, there is a great discrepancy nowadays between the value of gold and the value of silver, right? So previously that wasn't the case, but now it is the case. So the question then becomes, okay, so which nisab, like which amount do we use? Do we use the gold, or do we use the silver, right? So many scholars have said that we should always try to benefit the poor. And so we go with the lower amount. So meaning that anyone who has approximately $400 worth of wealth and has it for a year, then zakat is 1 lunar year, then zakat is obligatory upon that amount that they have, right? And this doesn't mean that the 400 is exempt, or the amount lower than the nisab is exempt. No, once you reach that amount, then your whole wealth, right, is considered to be zakatable. The challenge is that for many people, $400 is not a lot of money. Like in today's times, if you have $400, you're actually considered poor if that's all the wealth that you have. There may be people who have $400 who are struggling to pay their rent, who are struggling to put food on the table, to take care of their basic necessities. So therefore, it can be said that, and scholars have also ruled, that we can use the gold amount, which is approximately $6,400 Canadian. So if you have that amount and you've had it for a year, then that is when zakat will become obligatory upon you. My personal recommendation, right, taqwa versus fatwa, if someone has $400 and they don't really need that money, okay, so let's say it's a teenager, it's a member of your family, someone who has all their needs met, and there are, they don't have any expenses, their parents are taking care of them, they're not really saving up for anything, so they have no pressing need, they just have money, savings, $400, go ahead and pay zakat, okay, because at the end of the day, we're talking about a very small amount, right, 2.5%, okay, so it's not a large amount. Go ahead and give that zakat. However, if someone is actually running a household, they have bills to pay, they are trying to take care of their family, they are struggling to survive, then go ahead with the higher amount. Okay, so then you choose the gold as your nisab amount. So once you have $6,400 approximately, 1 lunar year after that, then you pay zakat on it, inshallah. I hope that is clear. If there's any questions with regards to nisab, actually let's keep the questions for now, because again, I will be covering things that may questions that you may have, inshallah. As I mentioned, the values will change daily. So keep, regularly, if you have not reached nisab yet, just have maybe once a month or something, just check, so you know what the price is, and like if you're getting close to that amount, so that you can identify your date of when you reach that point, and then zakat will be due 1 lunar year after that. And note your date of reaching nisab, because that will be your anniversary every year. of when you will check how much zakat is due upon you. Now, let's say, I mean, what are the chances that everyone's going to reach, the nisab amount in Ramadan, right? It's not very likely, probably. So therefore, if you want to give zakat in Ramadan, you can do that. What you do is you note your date of reaching nisab. Okay, 1 year after that, zakat will become due. But if Ramadan comes before that, you can give it in Ramadan. Let's say you want to make it the 27th of Ramadan, right? Personal preference, that's fine. So you choose to the 27th of Ramadan now as your date, and before you reach 1 year, you give out your zakat in Ramadan. You calculate and give your zakat in Ramadan before your anniversary. So you do it a bit early, 1 year, and then now your new anniversary is that date in Ramadan. And now every Ramadan, it's easy now, because every Ramadan at that date, you just calculate your zakat and you give it, inshallah. Okay. So your starting point date of when you reach nisab will vary for each person, but you can change that date by giving before 1 year. Uh, Before, essentially, when it becomes due, you give it in Ramadan, or whichever date you want to choose, you do it before that date, inshallah, you'll be fine. You don't want to delay it past that date. Okay, so let's say you reach nisab, let's say in Rajab, okay, in some date, the 10th of Rajab, and zakat is now due a year later on the 10th of Rajab, following year. But now you're like, no, I don't want to give it in Rajab, I'll rather give it in Ramadan, so I'll delay it by 2 months, right? And I'll give it in Ramadan instead. You don't want to do that. Okay, so if it becomes obligatory in Rajab, then either you give it in the coming Ramadan, which may be very soon, or you delay it, or you give it the next year in Rajab, and then from the following year you can give it in Ramadan if you like. Okay, so you can change your date, but try not to extend it past a year. So take out zakat 1 lunar year later and every lunar year thereafter, as long as you have maintained net assets above the nisab level. Okay, so if at any point your wealth, your net assets go below the nisab level, then it resets. Okay, it resets. So you don't continue. Your calculation will reset if your net assets fall below the nisab amount at any point during the year. Okay, I hope that is clear. Now, in terms of who zakat is obligatory upon, okay, so each Muslim, okay, individual, each spouse is responsible for their own zakat. Okay, so zakat is not something that is given as a family. It is something which has to be given individually. So each individual, so if the jewelry, for example, is owned by the wife, then she is liable for paying zakat on that. The husband is not liable to pay for her. Similarly, if the husband owns assets that are under his name, then he's or wealth that is under his name, he's responsible for giving zakat on that. And if it's shared, then it's 50-50. Okay, so whatever arrangement you have, each owner, right, each shareholder of any asset or wealth will be required to pay their own zakat. Now, the husband can offer and say that and tell his wife, look, I'll pay your zakat for you, and that's fine. There's no harm in doing that, but it is not his responsibility to pay zakat for her. She will be responsible if she reaches the nisab level and she has wealth and assets, then she will be required to pay her own zakat. Husband will be required to pay for his own zakat. Now the question is with regards to children. Are children required to pay zakat or not? And this goes back to a fiqhi juristic question with regards to, is zakat due on wealth or is zakat due on the individual? So I think the majority of the fuqaha have said that it's on the individual. So for example, when prayers, for example, or any other obligation becomes obligatory upon you once you hit puberty, once you become Islamically mature. So therefore, if children own wealth, so those jurists, those scholars will say that zakat won't really be obligatory upon the wealth owned by children. However, the view in the Hanafi school is that no, the zakat is actually on the wealth, not on the individual. So therefore, any wealth, right, that exists in the possession of Muslims will have to have zakat paid upon it, provided that it reaches the level of nisab. For that, meaning for the individual, for the owner of that wealth. So the better thing to do, again, fatwa versus taqwa. Better thing to do is that yes, if your children have savings, wealth that they have accumulated, Eid gifts or whatever it is that they have either earned or that they have saved up, then do pay the zakat on it. That is the better thing to do, especially if it's reaching, if it's reaching nisab, of course, you should give zakat on that wealth. Even if it's not, and if you're able to, like, just include it in your own wealth, if it's not reaching nisab, especially the silver nisab, it's going to be a pretty minimal amount in terms of what you pay in zakat. So the better thing to do, my recommendation, include children's wealth in your zakat calculation and pay on their behalf. Now the question is, what is zakat due upon? And this is where a lot of times, unfortunately, it gets tricky. So I'm going to try to simplify it, inshallah, make it as easy as possible. So surplus individual wealth that is yours. Okay, so any wealth that belongs to you that you are not using for your personal needs, or any assets that you are not using for your personal needs, that is yours. Okay, that is basically what zakat is due upon. But when you're starting off with the calculation, you consider yourself as an individual and that which is yours. So whatever you own and is on your name and would be considered part of your inheritance, that is considered to start off with when we talk about zakat calculation. Now, in terms of what are we talking about, what are we calculating? So for starters, cash. Okay, so any cash that you have, whether it's banknotes, whether it's in any other form in your bank account, savings, all of those will be included in your zakat calculation. That includes funds that are put aside for a special purpose. So let's say you're saving up to buy a house, or for Hajj, or for getting one of your children married, whatever the case may be. Any savings that you have, even if it's for a particular purpose, that is zakatable. Okay, and this is one of the one of the wisdoms I forgot to mention in the beginning, is also to discourage hoarding, right? And yes, even now that will include sometimes, meaning you're not hoarding. What I'm trying to say is you're not hoarding if you're saving for a particular purpose, but one of the overall wisdoms of zakat is to discourage hoarding, and therefore the encouragement rather is that we put our wealth to use, we invest it in a halal manner, we give it away, we do something with our wealth, we don't just accumulate wealth. So that is also one of the wisdoms of zakat. So any savings that we have, zakat will be due upon that. Okay, so you will include that as part of your calculations. Your investments, okay, so any investments that you have, investment accounts, wealth simple, whatever, any investments that you have, those will also be included. So shares, stocks, mutual funds, any whichever form of investment, investment in a business, properties, all of those would be considered. Now there are some technicalities around that, or some exceptions, and I will go over that inshallah. Trade goods or inventory with the intention of resale, okay, including stocks and properties. Okay, so any trade goods that you have, any inventory, so whether you're selling on Amazon or eBay or on Kijiji, or you are buying properties and trying to resell them at a higher price, if you are short selling, buying stocks and trying to flip them when their price goes up, all of those things will be considered as trade goods and as inventory, with the intention of resale, and those will be included. Their market value will be included in your zakat calculation. Okay, so just to put it very, very simply, anything that you're planning to resell, okay, at a higher price, it will be included in your zakat calculations, inshallah. Okay, so that is something to keep in mind. For inventory or goods, you could include, right, according to many scholars, I believe you could include the wholesale price, as opposed to the retail price. Okay, but that's for goods that you are going to be selling. For stocks and properties, it would be the market value at that time. Shares in companies and businesses that have liquid assets. Okay, so when you buy a share in a company, you buy stocks, that company, right, in which you have bought shares, in which you have invested, most likely will have some liquid assets, and that those two should be included in your as part of your wealth, because you are a shareholder in that company, and you have a share in that company's wealth, no matter how small. And I will get into more details about that as well when we talk about shares, inshallah. Jewelry. So this question often comes up. Okay, well, is there zakat due on jewelry or not? So the general opinion is that yes, zakat is due on gold and silver jewelry only. There are scholarly views, right, of some of the madhahib that talk about exemptions on jewelry, but that is for jewelry that is actually being used and being worn regularly, right? So it's not jewelry that is stored away to be kept safe, but rather it's something that is worn in some cultures, jewelry that is worn regularly. So according to some of the madhahib, that will be something that would not be included. But again, to be safe, a better thing to do is include all gold and silver jewelry. And I should mention that it's not just jewelry either, but utensils or anything else that contains gold or silver, that should also be included in your calculation as part of your assets that would be considered for zakat, that will be zakatable. Yes, if you really need to, if there's a woman, for example, a sister who wears jewelry regularly and she doesn't have any other source of income, she doesn't have any wealth, to pay zakat on that, then according to those who follow those madhahib that allow the exempting jewelry that is worn, of course that could be done. They could use that dispensation, but generally I would advise as much as possible we include all gold and silver jewelry to be safe, inshallah. Question comes about other types of jewelry, so platinum and anything else that a person may be wearing, then there is no zakat on those. Okay, so unless they are for resale, unless they are trade goods, otherwise there will be no zakat on platinum jewelry or any diamonds or anything of that sort if you own those. But gold and silver, yes, you should include that in your zakat calculations. Account receivables, good debts that are owed to you. So if you are expecting payment, there is a debt, a loan. Someone has borrowed money and you are expecting that they are going to pay you back, then you will include that amount in your zakat as well, inshallah. Account receivables, so if you've sold something and you've sent the invoice and you are expecting payment, the goods have been sent, then you will include that amount in your zakat calculation as well. Other things, of course, livestock and crops, we're not going to be getting into today, but if someone is in that situation, then you can certainly seek guidance from a reputable scholar, inshallah, from reputable sources on how to deal with that, inshallah. Now, what is zakat not due on? Okay, so everyone's sort of probably waiting for this. Okay, so yeah, what is exempt? So items or property that are for personal use, no matter how large or how valuable they are. So anything that you are using, that your family is using, that you are putting to use, whether it's a house, whether it's a car, regardless of how expensive it may be, any items in the home, technology, other properties even. So cottage, if you have a cottage for your personal use, or there's a home that, you're giving to your family members to live in, and they're not, you're not planning to sell it or anything like that. So any land, any property, anything that is for your personal use is exempt. Okay, so you will not be including that in your zakat calculations, regardless of how valuable or how large it may be. Okay, so that should be clear. Anything that you're using that you are just keeping for yourself, and it is not wealth, it is not gold, it is not silver, you're not planning to resell it at a higher price, then in those cases, you will not be including those in your zakat calculations. Items or tools or property that are used for business and are not for sale, okay? Tools of the trade, those also will not have zakat due upon them, okay? So if you have a property, a business, a store, a factory, whatever it is that you use for business, any other tools, technology, anything like that, and it's not for sale, you use it for production, then there will be no zakat on that either, okay? So just make that clear. Those things are all exempt from zakat. If you have revenue generating property that is not intended for resale, so you have bought a property so that you can rent it out on, I don't know, Airbnb, or it's rented out to someone, it's property that is commercially leased out, whatever the case may be, you don't have any intention of reselling it at a higher price, then in that case, there is no zakat on the market value of that property either. Now, the wealth that you generate, the revenue, the income that you generate from the rental will be included as part of your overall wealth, but there will be no zakat per se on the actual value of that property, as long as it's not intended for resale. The moment you intend to resell something, then the intention counts, and now the entire market value of that item, that object, that property will now be considered for zakat. Now, bad debts that are owed to you. So if you've given a loan to someone and you do not expect that they're going to pay back, they're in a bad situation or they've forgotten about it, there's almost no hope of getting that money back, then you will not be including that wealth in your calculation. Another thing that just came to mind is that sometimes you give money to someone, maybe a relative or someone in need, and then they say that you intend to give it to them as a gift, but they expect that that they want to give it back to you. So that will not be considered from what I understand, that will not be considered to be, a debt that you need to, or sorry, a loan that you need to pay zakat on, or money that you're expecting, because for you, from your part, it was a gift, right? So you're not expecting it back. Whenever, if they ever decide to give it back, then you'll deal it with it then. But at this point, there's no zakat on it, inshallah. Zakat is not due on wealth that is not yours yet. So let's say it's been put aside for you, someone has put it aside for you, but it's not really yours. It hasn't been handed over. It's not, would not be considered to be, you're not its legal owner. It would not be part of your inheritance. Then in that case, there is no zakat on that. This will be especially relevant when we talk about defined benefit plans, inshallah, for retirement savings. So we'll talk about that in further detail. But basically, wealth is that is not yours yet. Your name is not on it. It has not been handed over to you yet. That zakat is not due upon it. Now, how much zakat? Of course, I think most of us know by now, it's 2.5% of whatever wealth is calculated that is zakatable, 2.5% of that. Now, again, we have this mindset of trying to get away from paying zakat, but so there's this really nice meme that's been going around, that basically says that this is 2.5%. Is right of the poor. The rest is all yours. Okay, so it's really not a huge amount. Okay, 2.5% is a very, very small amount, considering what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing us to keep for ourselves and to enjoy, and to benefit from. So therefore, we should really try, again, as much as possible, not to try to, to find exemptions, not to try to get away with it, get away with giving less. It's 2.5%. It's really not that much. Unless someone is in dire need, and there may be people during the current financial situation who may find themselves in a different situation today than they were previously when it came to calculating zakat. And again, as I mentioned, if you really need to, then go ahead and take advantage of the exemptions. But otherwise, it's a fairly minimal amount. So try to give it fully, inshallah. Now, in terms of deductions, what can you deduct? So debts that are due immediately, or that are due very soon upon you. Okay, so if you have a debt that you owe to people or to someone, and they are expecting payment of it right now, you need to pay it as soon as possible, or there's a deadline and it's coming up, there's a payment that is going to be due, then you can deduct that from, subtract that from your overall wealth. Okay, so you don't have to pay zakat on that amount. If you have defined payments that are due within the month, so you have, I don't know, mortgage payments, rental payments, you have insurance payments, whatever payments that are coming up and they are defined, it's almost, you've already agreed to it, it's a debt upon you that you have to pay, and it's coming up within the month, then inshallah you can deduct that as well from your overall zakatable wealth. If you have defined payments, essentially debts that are going to be due up to a year from now, okay? Now, scholars have mentioned, you can deduct what's due within the month up to a year, okay? So again, this is something that I don't recommend. If you can not deduct up to a year's payment, then don't do it. Like if you're okay with giving zakat, you're not going to be hit financially if you pay zakat on your full amount without taking advantage of this deduction, then go ahead and give it on the full amount, okay? But again, if you have a real problem, if you have a real situation, a challenge, especially if you are going to pay zakat on the full amount now, and doing so is likely to cause financial hardship and put those payments at risk. So you will not be able to meet your obligations within the next year if you were to pay zakat on the full amount. Then in that situation, go ahead and deduct up to a year, meaning what is going to be due upon you is essentially a debt upon you for the coming year. Okay, the payments that you will have to make, again, whether it's rent, mortgage, insurance, things that you will have to pay. You can deduct those up to a year, but really only do this. My personal advice is only do that if you really, have a real fear that you will not be able to meet your obligations within the coming year. Otherwise, go ahead and pay it on the full account. Deductions that you can also take out, the scholars have mentioned, the penalties that may be incurred for withdrawal. So for example, if you have an RRSP, you have some sort of retirement savings, and if you were to withdraw those funds, they would be hit either, 30%, 40%, 50%, some sort of penalty. Then many of the scholars have said that you can deduct that amount, that penalty from that amount, and then pay zakat on what is left over. Again, if you cannot do this, that would be better. That would be the safer thing to do. But if paying zakat on the full, retirement savings is a big hit and you don't have that many liquid assets or liquid wealth to be able to pay for that, then you can go ahead and take advantage of those deductions. Now, in terms of shares, if you are keeping shares with the intention of resale, okay. So once again, I mentioned this before. I'll do it again. If you are holding on to shares with the intention of resale, that I have bought this stock and it's a penny stock or whatever stock, and I expect that it's going to go up in price, and then I'm going to sell it. I'm going to make a profit off that. Then you should be paying zakat on the market value, okay, on your date. So whatever price it is, whatever it's worth at that time, you pay zakat on the market value. Of course, 2.5% of the market value. If you are keeping stocks with the intention of getting ongoing returns or dividends or shares in any company or any business with the intention of ongoing returns or dividends, then you have two options. The first option is, the safer option is to pay on the full market value. Okay, so even if you have the intention of just holding on for getting returns and dividends, you're not really looking to resell it at a higher price, then you will pay. The better thing to do again is to pay zakat on the full market value of the share of the stock, 2.5% of the market value. The other thing you can do, which is probably more accurate but more difficult to do, is calculate the percentage of liquid or short-term assets owned by the company versus their long-term assets, and then pay zakat on that proportion calculated from the market value of your shares. Okay, now I know that sounds a little bit complicated, but essentially what we're trying to get at is that the liquid assets, so the short-term assets of the company that you own shares in, you have a share in that as well. But the zakat is not due on the other fixed assets or the long-term assets of the company. So, for example, their buildings, their tools, their technology, their furniture. Zakat is not really due on that. Okay, so if you give it on the full market value of the share, that is good, but you're sort of overpaying your zakat because it's not really required on the fixed assets of the company. Okay, so you can, if you want to lower your zakat on your shares, you can then try to get into the balance sheet, look at the balance sheet, calculate how much or figure out, how much it may be stated, just figure out what percentage of their assets are short-term or liquid assets, and then calculate how much of that would be part of your shares. So whatever the market value of your shares are, you take that percentage and then give zakat on that. So as an example, let's say the market value of your shares that you own is $10,000. Okay, the balance sheet of the company shows that 62% of their assets are long-term assets and 38% are short-term assets, okay, or liquid assets. So the zakat is due on the 38% of the $10,000, right? So it's due on the $3,800 and not on the $10,000, right? And then the zakat would be 2.5% of $3,800. Okay, I hope that's clear. It's a little bit complicated, but essentially you're trying to figure out how much of the company is liquid, right? How much are liquid short-term assets, and what is the proportion of the shares that you own, or of the market value that you of the shares that you own, and then you pay zakat on that. So you're not paying on the 100%; you're paying it on the that proportion of the short-term or the liquid assets. There's also an opinion, generally, which I also mentioned before as well, previous years, of scholars who have said that the shares are, if they are bought with the intention of getting dividends from them, not for resale at a higher price, then there is actually no zakat due on the shares, only on the amount that comes in, and they've likened it to a rental property, right? So you buy a property, you own that property, however. You don't pay zakat on that property because you're not looking to resell it. It's not a trade good. You are just generating revenue from there, and then that is included as part of your wealth, of course. So they've likened it to that. So scholars who have said that who have said that there's no zakat due at all on shares when they are kept for long-term sort of returns and dividends. As I said, I've talked about that view before. I've promoted it as well, or I've told people about it, but I do believe now that the better thing to do is to either pay on the full market value, even on the shares that you are not planning to resell, or do this calculation that I just described. Reason for that is because I don't think it's entirely accurate or correct to liken owning shares in a company to owning a property, right? Because a property is not going to have any liquid assets; it's a fixed asset. Whereas a company will have liquid assets that are, that you technically do own now. So zakat should be due upon that. So I do believe that the better thing to do on all shares is to either pay the full market value, or if you have kept it for long-term dividends or in returns, then calculate what percentage of liquid assets, short-term assets the company owns, and then pay that percentage of zakat on that percentage that you own. Now, in terms of retirement plans, so I see the question, my brother Atif, regarding RRSPs. So I'm getting to that question now, inshallah. So with regards to retirement plans, to put it simply, if the funds that you have saved up or that are saved for you for retirement are given by the employer as part of compensation, okay, so the employer has given that as part of your benefits package, and those funds are locked in, and the employer is the one who is contributing. You have no control over it. The employer is contributing to that pot, and if they haven't asked you, it's not voluntary. Even if you are able to direct how those funds are invested, but the employer is the one putting the funds into it, and especially if they are locked in, unless, except for some, some very rare circumstances, then and that wealth has never come to you, right? It's locked in. The employer has put it in on their behalf. Then you will calculate and pay zakat on it once received. Okay, so you don't have to worry about it right now. That wealth is not really yours yet because you haven't received it yet. It hasn't been handed over to you yet, and you don't really have control over it. You're not able to take it out. So therefore, zakat is not going to be due upon that, and will only be calculated and will become due once you have access to those funds. Okay, but this is not the case for all types of retirement plans. Okay, now if you contributed to a retirement plan or to some sort of scheme voluntarily, so the employer gave you an option and said, okay, you can contribute and we will match those funds. Okay, then or even if they're not matching, right? If they have given you the authority to voluntarily decide to contribute or not, then you have a few options in order of preference. So these are my recommendations in order of preference. So the best thing you can do, absolutely, is pay zakat annually on the full value of your RSP, of your retirement funds. Okay, if you're able to do that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you the wasa'is, He's given you the ability to do that, then you go ahead and give zakat annually on the full amount of your RSP, of your retirement savings. Okay, if you're able to do so. That is the absolute best thing that you can do, the safest thing that you can do. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you greatly for your taqwa and for your charity, inshallah. If you're not able to do that, and it's possible, right? Because your retirement savings may be large, it may be a large amount. However, it's possible that you don't have as many liquid assets to be able to pay that zakat. So then the second thing that you can do is pay zakat annually on the value of the RSP after deducting the withdrawal tax. Okay, so whatever withholdings that the government would have, if you were to withdraw the funds now, you can subtract that from that amount and then pay zakat on what remains. This is the second option. Okay, so the first one is pay zakat on the full amount. Secondly, if you're not able to do that, then reduce it by the withholding tax or the penalty, and then pay on what would be left of your RSP or of your retirement savings. The third option would be to calculate zakat annually. Okay, so you calculate zakat annually. You keep record of how much would be due every year, but you don't pay for it. You defer the payment until you actually access those funds. Okay, so when you retire, you get access to the funds, and then for all the years that you had these funds and that you had calculated zakat, you take it all out at once, lump sum, and then you give it away as zakat, and then you keep what is left. Okay, so this is also something that you can do. Better, again, if you don't include the withdrawal tax, right? Because when you're accessing it at that time, you're not paying any penalty. Once you retire and you access your funds. So it's better if you don't include the withdrawal tax. But again, if there may be situations where you do factor in the withholding tax or the withdrawal penalty. The last option that I would recommend, which some scholars have mentioned, but again, I don't know how widely accepted it is, so that's why I would suggest caution with this last one, is that even for voluntary plans where you have put funds in but they're locked in, you calculate zakat and pay only when you access the funds. Okay, I'm not very comfortable with this last option. The reason for that is that these funds at the end of the day are yours. They are growing. That's why you've invested them, right? To save on your taxes probably, and to get them to grow for retirement, to save for your retirement. So at the end of the day, it's wealth that you are saving, and that is most likely growing, and that is going to benefit you. And that is pretty much what zakat is due upon, right? So I'm not very comfortable with option D. I do think that some form of zakat should be given on voluntary retirement plans, but nonetheless, just so you know, that option D is there, especially if someone finds themselves in a very precarious financial situation. They don't have access to funds, they cannot pay zakat right now. Even when they get the retirement funds, maybe they are in financial difficulty. Then perhaps option D can be used. Just my personal recommendation, but I am not very comfortable with that option. With regards to RESPs, so again, registered education savings plans for our children. Going back to the discussion about zakat being due on the on the individual or the wealth, I would say that yes, if you have an RESP, go ahead and pay zakat on it as well. Inshallah, that is the most absolute safest thing you can do. The other opinion, of course, would be that if it will come down to who actually owns the wealth, right? So who is the rightful owner of that wealth? If you, as the parent, still own that wealth, although it is reserved for your children, then it would be included as part of your wealth, because at the end of the day, you are able to withdraw those funds. However, the government contributions are going to be withdrawn then, right? Like they're not going to be made available to you. So the right thing to do, I believe, with regards to RESPs is to pay zakat on them as well and include them in your calculations, inshallah. And Allah knows best. Now the question is, to who zakat should be given, okay? There are, of course, categories Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran, in Surah At-Tawbah. It's very clear. إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينَ, to the needy and the poor. And the scholars have talked quite a bit about what the difference is between the two. So some have said that the fuqara are those who are destitute, who are completely needy, who don't have anything, who really don't own anything at all, or very, very little. Whereas the poor are those who have something, but it is not equal to, it is not reaching nisab. Okay, so it's below the nisab amount, and we can go with the gold nisab, so the higher amount, so around approximately $6,400. So they don't have assets up to that level, and therefore, but they're still needy. Others have said, they're still poor. Others have said that somebody who has a needy would be those who have less than half of what they need for the year, and the poor would be those, or the masakin would be those who have more than half of what they need for the year. So I mean, there's different ways that the scholars have tried to explain it, but at the end of the day, essentially what we're talking about are people who do not own the nisab amount. Now, a question comes up that if a person owns nisab amount in terms of their necessities, in terms, let's say they own a home or they own a car, they own technology, and it brings it up, they own furniture that brings it up their net worth, meaning their net assets, up to the nisab amount, or past the nisab amount. But these are items that they need. These are their personal necessities. They don't have anything extra. Can they be given zakat or not? So this is a question that I've tried to do some research upon. I think there are differing views. The safer opinion is that for people who own the nisab amount, meaning in terms of their necessities, they don't have anything extra, but they own up to $6,400 or $6,400 or more in terms of their wealth, their net worth in terms of the items and the objects that they own, that they would not be eligible to receive zakat. So that zakat would be for those who have less than that. But others have argued that those people may still be in need. Someone has a house, and they need help because they're not able to pay. They're not able to put food on their table, even though they have a roof over their heads. So therefore, there's a bit of discussion on this. Practically, I think in most cases it will be very difficult to ascertain, exactly, who has how much. So if you are able to tell, and that the other question also is how much due diligence is required. So due diligence does not need to be to the point of shaming the person or getting into their personal life. You can sort of ask a little bit or ask around about a person's situation. And if it appears that they are really in need, and their lifestyle suggests that they are in need, perhaps or you are able to tell somehow that they are most likely in need, then inshallah you are able to go ahead and give zakat to them. The other question also that comes up often is, should I tell someone if I'm giving them zakat? And the answer to that is no, you do not need to tell them. And in fact, don't tell them, right? Give it as a gift, give it in a nice way so that they don't feel, give it in a dignified manner. Okay, so you do not need to tell someone that you are giving them zakat. That is better that you actually don't tell them, inshallah. Okay, it is also better that you give zakat directly. So if you know people in your community, who are in need, or whether it's locally in your community, that would be better, of course, but also people who are close to you, distant relatives, perhaps, people that you know, or your friends, relatives know firsthand, people who are in need, then try to give that zakat directly if you can. Okay, that is the better thing to do. Okay, the third category that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran is the al-amilina alayha, right? So, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, the zakat collectors. Now, normally these were people who were assigned by the state, by an Islamic state, by an established authority. The question comes up, can charities use zakat funds to pay collectors? Scholars are somewhat split upon that. The safer opinion is that charities who have on their own decided to collect zakat and distribute zakat should not be using those zakat funds for paying anyone or for admin costs. Some scholars will say that yes, it is permissible to pay the staff under this category. So to pay those who are engaged in the collection or distribution of zakat, pay them with zakat funds. Some will say that, so that's not something which is unanimous. But most scholars, from what I can tell, are against using zakat funds for admin costs of charities. So this is something to be careful about, inshallah. And for charities, I always advise that it would be better if they did not use zakat funds to pay anyone or for any costs, but rather use other funds or other donations or other sources of revenue to cover those costs. That would be the better thing for them to do. In our circumstances, if you're giving to a charity, that is something that you may want to look at, and I will talk about that later as well, inshallah. When mu'allafati qulubuhum is mentioned, to soften the hearts, this was generally for converts or people who are new to Islam, to welcome them, to the faith community, to make things a little bit easier for them. Some will say that this is for those who are needy. Others will say so basically. Some scholars have mentioned that all the other categories fall under needy and poor. So it could be given to all of those others, provided they're needy and poor. Others will say, well, there's not much point in listing all the categories if they all have to be needy and poor anyway. So there's a bit of a discussion there. But nonetheless, to soften the hearts to those who are new to Islam, even if they are not needy, that is something that I think the majority of scholars would accept to be permissible. There are also instances where perhaps zakat was given to defer harm from the Muslim community as well. So people who are causing trouble, for example, but those were, I think, were very rare circumstances. Not everyone agrees upon those. So we're not going to consider that as a legitimate form of spending zakat today. But nonetheless, to give to those who are new to Islam, to welcome them to the community, to soften their hearts, to make things easier for them, is a valid category of zakat recipients. Captives. So this was for when slavery was happening, to free slaves or to help them. In today's time, some scholars have said this could be given to people who are imprisoned unlawfully to help with their cause. But this is not something which is perhaps unanimous, but nonetheless, I mention it because it does fall under this category potentially. Al-Gharimin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says those who are in debt. So someone who is in debt, and really meaning those who are struggling with their debt, they are in difficult circumstances, then zakat can be given to them to help them in their situations. Okay, but if someone is has a long-term debt, has a mortgage or something that they are paying over time in installments, and they're otherwise sort of living their life normally, going on trips and enjoying living a relatively comfortable lifestyle, then those people would not really qualify probably under this category. So these are people who are under the duress, or who are under the stress of debt, and they need to be relieved of that immediately. So those are the people who can receive zakat under this category. In the path of Allah, so this was generally understood to be used, at the time of war in defense of the community, when there was a call to arms, with regards to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and protecting the religion and protecting the community. So this was a legitimate expenditure. Many scholars have kept it to that. Others have said, things which aren't the equivalent of that. So, for example, works of da'wah, publishing da'wah material, propagation of Islam, of the religion, things related to that, is also permissible for that. Others have opened it up even more to anything which is considered to be virtuous. So you basically find these three categories when it comes to fi sabilillah. So either the original intent, and we still keep it at that, or we open it up to include things which are similar, or other forms of defending the community and defending Islam. Legal, expenditures for the defense of the community, or of the practice of the religion, or propagation of the religion. So you will find, different sort of levels. Of course, it is best and safest if it's kept to the original, but if not, opening it up perhaps a little bit, as long as it's related to the religion and the defense of the religion and propagation of the religion, then according to many scholars, that would be permissible. Travelers in need. So if there is a person who is traveling and they are stuck, and normally we would think that this is not something that would really happen in our times, but actually it could happen. So even in today's situation, somebody was traveling somewhere, the lockdown came into effect, they're not able to travel, they don't have access to their wealth. However, they do have wealth at home, right? So they are wealthy, but in that situation during their travel, they actually don't have access to their wealth and they're stuck. And during that time, they are considered as if they are needy and poor. Then in that situation, zakat could also be given to them as well. Now, in terms of delegation, so I mentioned that it is better to give zakat individually. That is the better thing to do. If you know someone, in these categories, especially the needy and the poor, and you can give zakat to them directly, that is better. Now, I should mention, going back to in the path of Allah, fi sabilillah, the question comes up, can the masjid use zakat or not? And, especially when it comes to masjid construction, that is something that we try to avoid, because the reality is that, mashallah, masjid projects are getting bigger and bigger and more costlier and more costlier. And those amounts really, if everyone starts giving their zakat for the masjid, then it really can take away from the right of the needy and the poor. So what we would prefer is that, even though, of course, it makes life easier for us if people were to give us zakat to help with the masjid project, not just ours, really any masjid project, but I would recommend really that we try to avoid doing that as much as possible. Give zakat for the needy and the poor. There are definitely many, many people who need zakat, who could use zakat funds, even locally, and of course, internationally. There are many people who are living in poverty. Give zakat to those who deserve it most. Inshallah, we can use our other funds, our voluntary charity, inshallah, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward greatly for the establishment of masajid and centers and for other such causes. So my personal recommendation is to try to avoid giving zakat to the masajid. Give it to the needy and the poor. If someone really insists and they really want to give it, so that is their prerogative. But at the end of the day, we would recommend giving it to the needy and the poor instead, inshallah. Now, with regards to delegation, so delegating zakat is permissible to an individual. So you can give it to another person, ask them to distribute it to someone. If you trust them that they are responsible, they know the rules and regulations of zakat, then they will give it to someone who is deserving to the best of their ability. Then inshallah you can do that. Or similarly to an organization that you trust will give it to one of the categories of zakat recipients, and you trust them to do it properly, then you can do that. But remember that the obligation is upon you, and that to give it to one of those categories, and that obligation is not really discharged until it reaches the intended recipients. Okay, so you are trusting the organization or the individual, but at the end of the day, it would really count once it reaches the intended recipient. So once you give it to the organization, that's only half. You've done half the job. So you found someone who can give it to someone who is an intended recipient or who deserves zakat, but it's not really done until it actually gets there. So the reason why I mention this is due diligence. Okay, so who are you giving your zakat to? If you're delegating it to an organization or an individual, who are these people? What are their practices like? What criteria do they use? Are there any admin and payment processing fees that are being deducted or that are being used? So, and it may be permissible, right? I mean, there are scholars, like I said, who will say that it is permissible to pay staff for working, in organizations, charities working with regards to zakat, that it is permissible to give zakat to them. So scholars, there are some scholars who will say that. There are some scholars who will even say that, payment processing fees that are deducted from zakat funds. So when you do an electronic transfer, especially if you're doing it, through credit card, and there is a fee that is being charged, so whether it's PayPal's 1.6% plus 30 cents, or 2.9%, as some will be charging, plus 30 cents, or maybe just 2.9%, does that count as part of your zakat? So you've transferred $100 of zakat, but $2.90 has been taken out of that and has gone to PayPal or to the credit card processor, not in your zakat. So, is that something that you have to take into account? Some scholars will say that yes, or perhaps many will say that yes, that should be taken into account, and you should pay a little bit extra to cover that, meaning pay extra not from your zakat fund to cover that, or calculate that and note that that has not been paid in zakat. May seem like small amounts, but of course, because we're dealing with an obligation, you want to be as scrupulous, and as careful as possible. So, point is, when you hand over your zakat to an organization, be careful about who you're giving it to. Do your due diligence, see who they're spending it on. Is 100% going towards zakat or not? If it's not, what is it? What else is it going towards? Meaning, is 100% going to the recipient, or is it going to someone else? Is it being used for payment processing, for admin fees, for staff salaries? Just do your due diligence before you give, especially your zakat. I would say generally any charity. By the way, the Canada Revenue Agency has a listing of all registered charities. You can go and search for a registered charity. You can search for Canada Muslim Association or any other charity that is registered in Canada. You can see how much they're receiving from where are they spending their funds, what is the revenue like on an annual basis. So you can get all that information, and you should really look at that information before you donate, because the charity space is one that is becoming very, very competitive. And most charities we trust are doing a good job, and people are have good intentions, but you should do your due diligence to know what is happening, how much is being spent on what, because at the end of the day, it is your wealth, that your money that you're handing over, and it is good to have diligence, especially when it comes to the payment of zakat. Now, in terms of who zakat should not be given to, so zakat should not be given to your dependents. So it's good to give zakat to people who are close to you, your relatives, if they are in need, if they qualify. However, it should not be given to dependents. So, for example, your children, your spouse, your parents, your grandparents, people who you are responsible for, you should not be giving zakat to them. Especially if you're living together, and zakat is going to be mixed up, or the funds are going to be mixed up. So don't give to dependents. However, you can give to people who are not your dependents. So your siblings, uncles, aunts, others who are related to you, cousins, brothers, sister, like I said, siblings. But so they're related to you, but they're not really your dependents. You can give zakat to them, and it's actually indeed good to give zakat to them if they are in need. The question comes up of the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ. So initially, yes, zakat, the obligatory charity, was forbidden for the family of the Prophet ﷺ, for his household, for his descendants by extension. And generally, this should be still the practice. This is, out of respect for those who are truly from the descendants and the household of the Prophet ﷺ, unless they are desperate. So there may be situations where they are desperate, and an effort should be made to help them with funds other than zakat. But if there's no other way, and they must, they are truly in a desperate situation, then at that point, zakat could be given to them. But it is something that has been discouraged, or generally something which should be avoided, and effort should be made to help them. And the question of faith comes up as well, that is there a restriction on faith? So I would say that the majority of classical scholars have said, based on verses of the Quran and Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that zakat should stay within the community of people who are giving it, meaning it should be within those who are paying zakat. So those who are paying zakat, the zakat should be given to their poor. So the question of faith then comes up there, that it should stay within the Muslim community, because Muslims are the ones who are giving zakat. However, some will say that there are examples where zakat perhaps was given to people who are not Muslim, and that it is permissible to do that as well. Allah knows best, but the majority opinion is that it should stay within the Muslim community. Of course, we should give charity to everyone, regardless of their faith, but not the obligatory charity. The obligatory charity has certain restrictions, of which one of them are potentially most likely having the same faith. However, voluntary charity, which is highly recommended and highly encouraged and is greatly rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well, that should be given to one and everyone. That voluntary charity certainly can be given to people and should be given to our neighbors, especially who are not Muslim as well, of course. Now, with regards to Zakat al-Fitr, I'll answer the questions, inshallah, at the end. Tight on time, so I'm just going to finish up with the presentation, inshallah, and then go to the questions. So with regards to Zakat al-Fitr, okay, so Zakat al-Fitr, the basic calculation is based on a measure at the time of the Prophet ﷺ called sa', right? So 1 sa' of staple foods. Now, the issue is that the sa' was calculated by volume, not by weight. Therefore, it has been understood or interpreted in different ways. But let's say, to be safe, approximately 3 kilograms. Some have said 2 kilograms, some have said 2.2, 2.5, closer to 3, 3.5 even maybe, but let's just say 3 kilograms of staple foods is essentially what is required as Zakat al-Fitr. Now, there's also the opinion of half of sa' of wheat, primarily in the Hanafi school, probably potentially in the others as well. So 1.5 kilograms approximately, or 2 kilograms of wheat, or 3.5, 4 kilograms of other staple foods. Some of the madhab have mentioned, scholars have mentioned that this ideally should be given in the food form. So it is better if Zakat al-Fitr is given as food, and that is something that we try to do as well, that we collect cash, because it will be hard, if everyone is bringing sacks of rice and wheat and dates, it would be difficult to manage. And we don't have the system to manage that, at least not yet at this point. So therefore, people can give the monetary contributions, but then we try to spend that, send it to the Sadaqah food bank, send it to places where it will be converted to food and given to people as food, because that is the asal, that is the ideal original default of Zakat al-Fitr. Scholars have said, some have allowed paying the monetary value directly to those in need. This is something which is deferred upon. So if someone can give the food directly to those in need, that is the best thing you can do. And the recipients of Zakat al-Fitr would be the same as Zakat al-Mal, the fuqara and the masakeen, those who are poor, and the needy and the poor. Monetary value generally is given, is stated as $10 per person. I'll get to that in a second, but this is something which is due upon every Muslim. Okay, and this is where Zakat al-Mal and Zakat al-Fitr differ, and they differ greatly, because for Zakat al-Mal, it is something that must be, that has certain requirements in terms of reaching a certain amount of wealth, which was the nisab, approximately $6,400. If you have that wealth and you have it for a year, then zakat becomes obligatory upon you. However, when it comes to Zakat al-Fitr, it is due upon every Muslim, right? Muslim, male, female, child, even baby, newborn, even who have their provisions for that day and night. Meaning, if you have provisions for the day of Eid and the night of Eid for one day, then essentially zakat becomes obligatory upon you. Some Zakat al-Fitr becomes obligatory upon you. So the standard of it becoming obligatory is much lower. Some will say that Zakat al-Fitr is due in the same way as Zakat al-Mal. So if a person has that much wealth, then Zakat al-Fitr will become obligatory. But really, Zakat al-Fitr should be given by pretty much everyone, okay? Because the standard agreed upon for the most part is that it is much lower. The standard is much lower, so therefore, standard of it becoming obligatory is much lower. So therefore, anyone who has any wealth, right, should be giving Zakat al-Fitr, wealth equal to their provisions for a day and a night. Okay. Now, the calculations for this year, this question comes up often. Okay, how much should we give if you're paying cash? Minimum $10 per person. Prices are going up. There's different ways you can calculate it, of course. If you go to Costco, you go to a wholesale place, and you calculate it based on a huge pack of wheat or something, then of course the price may be a bit lower. But we're looking at it from a perspective of a needy person, like a needy person today. If a needy person needs to give zakat, a needy person needs to buy food, right? Needs to buy wheat or something for the day of Eid. What would they have access to? They probably won't have access to Costco. They might be going to the local corner store, their local supermarket. So what is readily available, and how much is spent basically by a person nowadays to get a decent meal? Okay, so minimum $10 per person. We had a discussion amongst the King Council of Imams group, and a number of imams were actually saying higher amounts, $12 minimum, $15. So we would say, okay, $10 minimum per person, because considering the fact that there may be people who don't have much at all, but they still need to pay zakat al-fitr. So therefore, $10 per person is a reasonable amount, we believe. If a person obviously doesn't have that, they can't afford it, then it won't be due upon them. But anyone who can afford it, $10 per person for each family member, and this needs to be paid before Eid. Okay, it has to be paid. It must be paid before Eid. If a person doesn't pay it by Eid, they should still pay it, but they will be losing out on its reward, and they will be missing this obligation. So before Eid, try to do it beforehand. Now, advance payments are allowed. Some have said 2 or 3 days in advance. Others have set up to a month in advance. Do it in advance, because that way there's enough time for those funds or that food to get to people who actually need them. Okay, so do it sooner rather than later. We have a link on our website. If you go to canadamuslims.ca/donate, you can find a link to donate to give zakat al-fitr, inshallah. So do it sooner rather than later, inshallah. Get it out of the way, so that we can get it to those in need sooner rather than later, inshallah. Okay, so we're good. So I'll look at the questions in a minute. One thing that I do need to mention is with regards to the date. So going back to Zakatul Mal, people will ask, okay, well, what if there is wealth that I have received after my anniversary when Zakat becomes due? Do I still include it or not? And my advice to you would be that just set your anniversary when Zakat is due, and whatever amount of wealth you have on that date, just give Zakat on it. That's the absolute best and easiest thing you can do. The reason for that is if you try to figure out, if you try to pay zakat after 1 year has passed on your wealth and you have wealth that is coming and going, it's going to become very, very difficult to keep track of all the wealth and when zakat becomes due upon it. So that's why the best thing you can do is just have your anniversary when zakat becomes obligatory upon you, and just every year at that date, on your anniversary, your zakat anniversary, you just calculate what you have based on what we have discussed, and you give 2.5% of that. That is the absolute best and safest thing that you can do, inshallah. Okay, now in terms of questions, what is the recommended way to handle situation when one has missed the zakat in past years a while ago? She doesn't remember the details of wealth, cash, balance from those years. Okay, so I mean, it's great to pay zakat from past years. You should absolutely do that. So Allah rewards you for your sincerity and your effort in trying to do that. In that situation, what I would say really is just take your best guess. So just think of what amount of wealth you likely had at that time. If you have the details and you can look them up easily, that's great. But if you can't, then just your best guess, your best educated guess of what your financial state was at that time, and just give whatever you think would be most accurate based on what you likely had at that time. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most forgiving, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept it, inshallah. Canada's welfare state who uses our taxes for poor too. So can you say that the taxes we pay qualify as zakat? No, not really, because I mean, zakat, of course, has to have that intention. Number one. Number two, it has all these restrictions or guidelines with regards to who it should go to, and restrictions that have to be followed or guidelines that need to be followed. Not all of our taxes, of course, go towards the needy. What percentage exactly of each person's taxes are actually going towards the poor and the needy? So from what I can understand, it probably wouldn't be the prudent thing or the right thing, or at least the prudent thing to do, to consider our taxes to be a part of zakat. But this is a question. It's an interesting question that perhaps scholars and muftis, those who are much more knowledgeable than me, inshallah, can consider and look at. Perhaps they already have. Allah knows best. Zakatul Fitr will be due before Eid prayer. Zakatul Fitr, once again, will be due before Eid prayer. Okay, so before Eid Salah, whether we have Eid Salah or not, that's a separate question. But before Eid, the morning of Eid, you should have your Zakatul Fitr out, inshallah. So try to do that, like I said, sooner rather than later. Find a charity or find someone in need who is deserving of it, or find a charity who promises to deliver it to those in need, who is collecting Zakatul Fitr, and go ahead and do that now. Do it as soon as possible, inshallah. that would be the better thing to do. And again, maybe add a little bit extra to cover the processing fees, payment processing, just to be safe, inshallah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us all. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Zakat on RSP, yes. This was a long question. So inshallah, you can go back. It's a detailed answer to that. But the basic answer is yes, but there are some details. So I would encourage you, inshallah, to go back and watch this presentation, inshallah. It is going to be saved on Facebook and on YouTube. So inshallah, you can go back, and once it is done, it will be saved. You can go back and you can find that portion, inshallah, with regards to, or that section that discusses giving zakat on RSPs, inshallah. At the end of the day, a reminder for myself and all of us, as I mentioned earlier, that this is something which is an obligation. It is something that inshallah, we will be rewarded for by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we will also be taken into account for if we have not done it properly. So let's try to be as diligent as possible in giving our zakat. Try to avoid as many deductions and exemptions that we can, and try to give as much as we can without any exemptions if possible, and only take exemptions if we really need to, inshallah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our giving, our obligatory giving. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our voluntary giving. May ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for our shortcomings. May ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us in our wealth and to purify our wealth, to purify us spiritually. May Allah Azza wa Jal protect us from all types of financial hardships, and may He grant relief to all of those who are facing financial difficulties. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. So now, inshallah, we are approaching time for adhan, inshallah, 4 more minutes. So let us take this time to make dua, inshallah. If you just give me a second, and I will, inshallah, get our Ramadan material up.
اللهم إنا نشهد بأنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت الواحد الأحد الفرد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم يا ربنا ويا مولانا ويا سميع الدعاء يا ذا المن والعطاء يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا حي يا قيوم يا بديع السماوات والأرض ويا رحمن الدنيا والآخرة ورحيمهما. اللهم يا ربنا ويا مولانا ويا سيدنا ويا إلهنا يا من تسمع كلامنا وترى مكاننا وتعلم سرنا وجهرنا، لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك ما عبدناك حق عبادتك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك ما شكرناك حق شكرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك ما قدرناك حق قدرك. اللهم
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. جزاكم الله khairan, my brothers and sisters, especially those who joined us from 7 o'clock for this Zakat presentation, and also those, of course, who joined us later on. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive me for any mistakes or shortcomings. If you'd like any follow-up, you can certainly contact me, as some brothers have done already. Inshallah, I will try to respond as quickly as I can. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. May Allah bless your meal. May He accept our fasting. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. Inshallah, I'll see you at 9:30 p.m. for KMA Quran Live. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.